industries. And I'm really excited to see where that synergy takes us.
Yeah. Courtney, do you want to speak to that in terms of kind of trained journalists?
Yeah, I think citizen journalism is the new form of activism, especially in more authoritarian or repressive societies, but also in open societies. I mean, I'm sure you all here have heard about, you know, many campaigns that were led by citizen journalists or nonprofit investigative journalism organizations, most of them using blogs to disseminate and connect their information. And we're seeing this a lot. You know, it's been really interesting to hear about all of what's happening in the health sector and, you know, human rights and democracy promotion and the efforts to increase access to information sometimes can be a lot more challenging because they're obviously a bit more political and contentious than perhaps providing basic services to a population can be, because actually by providing those services that will help shore up the power of whatever leader is you know, in power. But I think that, you know, with the, you know, as Nadeem pointed out, you have these new amateur political leaders. I mean, maybe we can show the video right now. It's one of the many videos that came out about the Egyptian revolution. And I would encourage you to just listen to the first few words. But what we see with videos and with mobile phones being on the scene is that anyone can become a citizen journalist in a moment. It's not an identity you need to have as a professional journalist. It's an identity that is enacted through one's actions. So this is just one example of a video that came out from Egypt, or rather from diaspora.
They ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you. Then you win.
I heard him say the revolution won't be televised. Al Jazeera proved him wrong. Twitter has him paralyzed. 80 million strong and ain't no longer gonna be terrorized. Organized, mobilized, vocalized. On the side of truth, for Medunya's living proof that it's a matter of time for the chickens.
You can turn the music down, but you can keep the image going if you want to just see some of the images, because I think this really is, most of these are images that were captured on cell phones, and probably some digital cameras, but mainly cell phones, which could then immediately be uploaded to YouTube, passed around, shared, and then also woven into these, you know, into YouTube videos or multimedia projects, into this really, you know, postmodern pastiche of creative and artful and inspirational, newsworthy material. And what we saw, for example, with Wael Ghanem, the Google executive who had started that Facebook page, became a symbol of the revolution, even though that, you know, that's not what he set out to do, and he set out to be anonymous. And I think that maybe brings us, you know, we've heard all of the amazing things about what technology can do and what mobile access can do, but there's a flip side of geotagging and you know, SMS tagged geolocations, because you have to be careful when you're in a repressive society about how you interact with social media and with public media, because just as it connects and allows public information and open access, it also allows the government or authorities or potentially non-state militias to track what's happening and to monitor you know, where people are, what they're reporting, what they're doing. I would encourage you, there's a blog called Egyptian Chronicles, which is in English, which is doing a great job of covering what's happening in Egypt, but it's amazing. They went in with cell phones into the Aman Dawla, which the security services were, no one went in there and with a cell phone and came out with it still in their hand. But they got to go in, they took pictures of rooms filled with shredded paper. It's amazing. And then they found, when they found records that weren't shredded, one woman who I've met, who's a cyber activist there, just tweeted every new thing that she came across so that she would have an immediate record that would be immediately out there and unable to block or get rid of. You can't erase it once it's out in the cybersphere. So, you know, using that to get that information out. But, you know, we also see that there's an abuse of mobile advocacy by authoritarian regimes. I mean, across not even just authoritarian regimes, but for example, in Uganda with the recent elections, I was there twice last year working on freedom of expression issues, and we were really concerned about what was going to happen in the lead up to the elections. And indeed, the week before the elections, President Museveni blocked SMS messages with certain keywords and then sent out pro-Museveni messages, basically urging people to vote for him. In Azerbaijan, recently we've seen the president block access to Facebook. He's just cracked down and arrested a lot of people who have been using Facebook, and a lot of them interact with it with their mobile phones. There are so many examples. It's hard to kind of pick only a few, but I wanted to also just give a couple of statistics that put into context how incredibly powerful these tools are. There are 5 billion mobile subscribers worldwide. 5 billion, that's 70% of the world population. So, as my colleagues on the panel have pointed out, it really is the linking of mobile with internet technology and with the networks around there. I think it's that you really strengthen and enhance the capacity of mobile advocacy to have an impact when you can show the results on a map that can be seen by people around the world and interacted with and added to, et cetera. And 4 billion text messages are sent every day, according to Mobile Action. I don't know how they got that number, but that's a lot of text messages. So there's an enormous amount of data out there. And maybe I could just talk briefly about the Ushahidi project that Freedom House did, or assisted Egyptian activists in doing in terms of blogging about the Egyptian parliamentary elections late last year. Using the Ushahidi platform, if you can go to the other slide, cyber activists and digital activists in Egypt are probably a little bit more advanced than most of their counterparts in the region, because they've been involved with Facebook, with blogging, with Twitter, from at least from 2005, when they really started to use it for political activism. So by training election monitors and working, as you suggest, going and working with the activists to develop the tools, what do they need, how is it going to work on the ground, and working to develop the platform. And so here's a little bit about how it looked. So this is the Ushahid report on what happened. I think we can't scroll down, so you can't see the breakup. But basically, you could report election violations via SMS, email, Twitter, Facebook, comments, voicemail, through CloudVox, email, and the web. So basically, any way you could report them. And then there are different, there were levels of verification so that you could have really credible and verified information that could be used by international election monitors, journalists, domestic monitors, State Department, et cetera. And it generated 1,252 reports during the voting period, including 287 videos and 111 images. And it had a Facebook plugin. It was integrated with Skype. So it was really an effort to open up election monitoring so that, going back to this idea of amateur election monitors, right? So you can, just with your mobile phone, you can become an election monitor. And we were discussing kind of before the panel, well, what about this, what do you do with the data? I think we were talking about the Libya maps of what's going on in Libya with the violence there. Well, what do you do with that information? I come from a journalism background, so for me, I would see this as incredibly useful for journalists, because a lot of times they get unverified reports. But if you get 5 unverified reports about the same incident, well, that's a form of verification. It enhances the credibility. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for this to be used.
We always have to think about, I know, like, for instance, for me, I'm always monitoring what Facebook is doing with my information. And so we always have to consider the issues around sharing. We take in information about our various donors or even the people for whom we provide services. And so we have to be careful about how we use that information, how we protect it, and what the hackers are doing, because the hackers are becoming even more vigilant than they have been in the past. So I think that is a really critical issue, security. I just was I read an article about a month ago regarding these short codes, the the dedicated short codes. If any of you ever kind of, I guess, participate in the Haiti campaign, you've texted to probably 40404, I think is the number that you texted to. Well, the problem is, the great thing about the dedicated codes is that you're able to engage with a cause. So you're able to donate to the cause using the short code, or else they can actually transmit information to you. The problem with that is if you don't have a dedicated short code, hackers can hack in and start sending messages. So to bring it home for all of you, all of us live in a town or a city. I live in a town. And whenever there's some sort of a snow emergency or an outage, my township sends me a text message about that, along with a voicemail message. So imagine if someone hacks into that system and now sends erroneous information. That's a real problem. So that's something that we have to consider. But I want to go back to a theme that I heard amongst the rest of our panelists, and it's really about democratization of access. And I'm one of those people, I can't go anywhere without my iPhone, and I have about 100 apps downloaded, one of which is the Causes app. And I don't know, any of you familiar with the Causes app? What's great about it is, on the one hand, it gives donors or prospective donors access to organizations they may not necessarily ordinarily have access to. The downside is I just pulled up an organization that's promoting white supremacy. So it democratizes access, but the thing is, who are you giving access to? So that's something that we have to think about is, you know, while on the one hand I think it's great because it does enable the small nonprofit in Newark, New Jersey that's working hard and diligent, and it just doesn't have that voice and doesn't have the budget to put on a large marketing campaign, it still gives access to people who may be pushing forward an agenda that isn't necessarily positive for everybody.
Before we open this to the audience, I want to ask each one of you kind of what's next. We're talking about stuff kind of out there on the edge anyway here today, but where is this going next? Can we just briefly, let's start with you, Nadim, and
Sure.
Move down the line.
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer that in the context of what we were most recently talking about, which is sort of the tremendous amount of data that we're able to generate with the tools we have right now. Courtney, you were talking about how Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, YouTube, SMS messaging, emails, all of these are being used to transmit data and do event reporting and talk about things that people see around them, talk about mundane things, all sorts of things. And I think we've gotten so good at creating tools to generate so much information, but where we're lacking is developing the tools to help us process all that information. And we're developing those right now. I think if John Gossier had been able to come, he works with a project called Swift River. And in the context of the Haiti earthquake, in the hours after the Haiti earthquake, there were hundreds of thousands of tweets and Facebook posts being transmitted by Haitians on the ground talking about, my uncle is missing, has anybody seen him? This building just collapsed, the community center has collapsed, things like this. And it was realized very early on that if we could find a way to systematically look at this data, we could get a very vivid picture of the real-time scenario of what things are happening in Haiti. But that data needed to be structured. That needed to be fed into a system that was structured to enable first responders and NGOs on the ground to be able to take that information and understand what it told them about resource shortages, about food shortages, about missing persons. How could they actually take that information and use it to effect a response? And so, John Gossier's project Swift River, it basically functions to basically deal with the swift river of information that comes into a system after a crisis happens. And how do you look at that data and validate what is good data and what is bad data? Because the problem with democratizing information, as you were just talking about, is that you get some garbage there too, right? You get some great data and you get some terrible data. And how is it that we can validate what is good versus what is bad? And so I think the next revolution in dealing with the data has to deal with validation and sort of the authenticity of what's good and what's bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Andrew?
I certainly think that part of the story, just to play on that, is going to be about creating frameworks for opening this data. Right now we're talking about open sourcing the tools, but the actual data sets. There will be people who get PhDs in the future who are data mining this kind of content to understand exactly how to better prepare for the next one. The thing that I see that's incredibly exciting, and this is an organization I encourage you to all check out, it's called Movirtu. And Movirtu is run, full disclosure, by a PopTech fellow named Nigel Waller. is aimed, everybody in this room has a mobile phone number, and it's tied to your mobile phone. So if you lose your phone, right, you have to go and then reassociate a physical phone uniquely with that number. Now, that's not the way most people's email works. If anybody here has a Gmail account, you don't have it tied to a physical computer. The email just sort of lives in what we call the cloud, right? It lives in the internet. So there's a whole population. We heard about 5 billion out of 7 billion people. That leaves somewhere between 1.5 and 2 billion people without access to a mobile device, often and mostly because they can't afford the physical device. If you live on $2 a day, the cost of even a $30 cell phone is a 6 to 9 month savings plan just to get the physical device. So if you can dissociate the number from the device, then you can access it from any phone. And so what's happening is organizations like Movirtu are creating cloud-based mobile services for what we think of as the base of the pyramid that are dissociated from any phone. So I can pick up Chris's phone and access my phone number, my SMS messages, all of that. I can basically hit 10 buttons and turn it temporarily into my phone, just like I temporarily log into Gmail and then turn it back. And that's going to enable a whole population of people who are the most at-risk people, because they're people in really severe poverty, to get access to all of these services. So I think as those kinds of systems come online, we're going to see an even greater explosion of efficacy.
Christopher?
So I'd like to agree with both of the previous two what's comings, and I think the third what's coming that I see is with this explosion of mobile technology where you have access to information and information has access to you, we have seen, at least at UNICEF and in the humanitarian actor space, an enormous increase in the nature and the type and the number of people who want to volunteer their time to help, especially after a sudden onset emergency, after a disaster. I believe that one of the big changes that needs to happen, and may very well happen this year, is looking at how we can authentically engage those people, their volunteer spirit, their energy, into helping the humanitarian space. And I think that what we'll find is that there are some people who are some types of people and some groups that are very good at certain types of things, and some people, it's sort of like that in Ratatouille. So I've watched Ratatouille like 5 times on the last 2 plane flights. And there's this line that, you know, a great chef can come from anywhere, but not anyone can be a great chef. And I think that you'll find that about volunteers as well. And this volunteer technical community that is so inspired to spend time mapping out the streets of Port-au-Prince and after the earthquake in Haiti, or spending their time to go and sit with Swift River and help it learn to better catalog results. Some parts of that will be really, really useful to the humanitarian actor space, and some parts won't be, and will actually possibly be harmful. And I think that in this next year, if we can start to figure out some of the interfaces between the big humanitarian organizations and this enormous global volunteer spirit, which does not only exist in the global north, but also in the south, and how we can correctly talk to each other. If we can figure out some of those strands and what we should talk about, and if we can be easy to drop the things that don't work without having attached too much ego or sentiment to them, and I think we can construct a very interesting new non-sovereign, non-nation state-based engagement in relief action that comes more from networks, more from personal interactions, and more from sort of super connected people who have specific sets of skills. So I think that is one thing that we'll see in the very near future.
Liz and then Courtney.
Well, thank you for that. I see a lot of different things, so I'm going to have to just shorten it down. One is, based on all the great work that my fellow panelists are doing on the continent, there are a lot of young people, particularly in Kenya and Kenya's iHub, a lot, and what I refer to, or what is referred to as the Silicon Rift Valley. A lot of young folks on the continent are really becoming engaged in the space, and they're beginning to participate in developing these applications. You know, also there's an application. There's a program called. It's put on by the World Bank, and it's Apps for Development that encourages young people to develop applications around the Millennium Development Goals. And so I think it's really important for us to note that while there are great activities taking place in the U.S. and elsewhere, they're definitely supporting what's happening in the developing world. Developing world is also coming up with its own solutions and partnering with these organizations. So that's one. Now, to go back to the U.S., and I think this actually could apply elsewhere, one of the trends that I'm seeing out there is the increased adoption rates around location-based advertising driving purchases. And so if you've got your phone, depending on where you are, you register and say, you're right here in NYU. And so based on sort of a preset criteria that you've set up, you're able to the application is able to provide you with coupons and suggestions for purchases. Well, if you think about it from a nonprofit standpoint, if you look at an organization, for those organizations that, let's say, are around here right now around us that may not necessarily have the voice or the budget, again, to get your attention, if we were to integrate them into that model, that location-based model, then all of a sudden you give access to really small organizations that otherwise wouldn't be able to engage with you and perhaps even promote their events or provide you with some kind of information about what they're doing and, of course, most importantly, get you to donate now. So that's what I'm seeing on the horizon.
Or give you lunch, right?
Yeah.
Courtney?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
What's ahead?
Yeah, I mean, all of these sound great, and I'm looking forward to that, to when all of this happens. And I think that, there's going to be a decreasing of the digital divide, if not in terms of the actual technology itself, in terms of the benefits that accrue from being part of the, information economy and the cybersphere and digital activism, et cetera. But let me just throw out some cautionary notes about maybe the flip side of what we might see. As access increases and new domain names, for example, in different languages and different non-Latinized scripts come out, I think we have to be worried about the balkanization of the internet and of information. And we also have to worry about regimes creating basically their own national internets, as happens in China and Saudi Arabia. I think that what happened in Egypt and Tunisia has been a huge wake-up call to authoritarian regimes who want to hang on to power. And so they're going to be really examining how far are they willing to go to prevent access to information, to prevent the circulation of information. I'm writing my doctoral dissertation, just finishing up, about cyber activism in Egypt. And until February 3rd, I had written that it was not possible for Mubarak to cut off access to the internet because there are 200 private ISPs. It's a privatized infrastructure. They don't have a central access point. And I was wrong, because he decided that it was in his political interest to shut down the internet and incur all of the economic costs that was going to come with that and all of the internet pressure. And he did it for 5 days. He pressured international companies like Vodafone to send out SMS messages denying what was happening in the street and basically pro-Mubarak SMS messages.
And Vodafone got some political capital, social capital, by saying, "Hey,
Yes.
Look what they're doing."
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. And so then you had Google and Twitter coming up with Speak to Tweet, which was designed to get around some of the blocks and setting up good old-fashioned landlines that could connect through old-fashioned means. But I think we need to look going into the future. Many countries have only one point of access for their internet. So I just got back from Mozambique. They have one line in. It's owned by a private company. But that means it's incredibly susceptible, that company, to government pressure. And in many countries, the government owns the 1 or 2 lines into the country. Egypt had 2 when I was there in 2008. And I don't know if you remember when the underwater cable, something happened to it, and the internet was cut off for 2 days. So I think we really need to think about the infrastructure that's letting all of this virtual information take place. And we can't forget about the real architecture that's at the bottom of this. And we do have to look at, just as activists and advocates are learning from each other, repressive governments are also learning from each other. And so
It's an arms race, very much.
it is a race, but I do believe, and I think that authoritarian regimes know this, that information in authoritarian regimes or in repressive societies is inherently subversive. And that's why they want to shut it off. And so if we can keep the information circulating, I think that is a subversive act, and publicity is power. And that's why these tools are so important for advocates, especially political advocates.
Thank you, panelists. I just want to open it up now to the floor. Anybody have questions for the panelists? Yes. We need a mic over there here. Why don't you? Yeah, thank you.
That's convenient.
Could you state your name and organization,
sure. I'm
please?
Daniel. I'm a Wagner student here at NYU, Urban Planning. I have, for a long time, when I give presentations, I've been writing a cell phone number on the screen, on a chalkboard, literally with chalk. It's a 202 number usually, and I tell people about particular actions that could be taken contacting their government elected officials, like a senator, and I ask them to put it into their telephone, and whenever there is something that they think that their elected official should be doing, just you have that number in your phone then, and you call them up. And you could watch a whole room take out their cell phone and program in Gillibrand or Schumer's phone number. And it's a thought, it's a lot of people have the surplus minutes. So, but I've always been, I'm not a programmer, and this isn't my main preoccupation, but what I've
So
always...
your question?
Yes, my question is, are there apps out there or being developed that you've seen that facilitate an easier and more exponentially impactful way for people to engage directly with their elected officials, particularly on mobile?
Yeah,
Thanks.
Who wants to take a crack at that?
Go ahead. Okay.